name is Prakash Ramdass. I'll be conducting this workshop on a step-by-step guide to conducting a systematic review and meta-analysis. Can you guys hear me? Yes. Okay, so how do I go forward? Right click? Sorry. So I'll be giving this workshop. I have no financial or conflict of interest. Alright, so before I actually conduct this workshop, what I'd like to show you, draw your attention, if you can see from 2000, the past 20 years or so, what has happened? Publishing systematic review has dramatically increased. Even within the past 10 years, you can see it's actually tripled. So we can see at 2012, so we had about 8,000, and now, 2019, it's over 20,000. So it actually tripled, and of course we're in 2022 now, which means it's even more, has increased even more. One thing that I've noticed during the pandemic, I don't think there's a disease that has been published more than COVID. That's fine, that's okay. Once they can hear me, that's fine. Everyone can hear me, yes? So, and online, hopefully they can hear me online as well. Yes. So I don't think there's a disease that has been published as much as COVID. And especially on systematic review, because they've done so many studies, and then, of course, researchers did the systematic reviews. So we'll see these numbers going up more and more. Also, what's very interesting, a lot of journals are actually accepting systematic reviews and meta-analysis. Before that, they wouldn't, but because there's such a huge market for it, they are doing that. And some journals are actually only publishing systematic reviews and meta-analysis. All right, so what I want to draw your attention here to, this is called the pyramid of evidence or hierarchy of evidence. And at the base of this pyramid, we have representing, so the sides represent the numbers, and it also represents the evidence in terms of quality, or we can say validity or accuracy of this evidence. So at the bottom of the pyramid, the base of the pyramid, there's more studies, but they are of less qualities or they have less validity. And as you ascend the pyramid, the quality of evidence increases and the number of those studies naturally decreases. Now, what is at the peak of this pyramid? You can see systematic reviews and meta-analyses. So, which means it is a very important research method. In essence, what systematic review and meta-analysis is, it's synthesizing information, both quantitative, which is the meta-analysis, and qualitative, which is the systematic review. And usually, to have any sort of policy or any sort of medication to treat a disease, this is what they use. They use a systematic review and meta-analysis, because one study itself does not give you that information. So you cannot make a policy or a decision based on one study, because that's not scientifically accurate or advisable, right? So you'll have several studies, which is the replicability of those studies, and you may have varying information. For instance, such as they may show some positive effect, negative effect, or no effect at all. So what you'll do, you'll compile all of these studies, and you want to have a conclusion or a, what we say, the synthesis or pooled analysis, which also you guys. So that's why it's at the top of the pyramid, the apex of the pyramid, and it has the highest quality of evidence. Here we're looking at different types of reviews. So we have many different types of reviews. We have what is referred to as a traditional literature review. We have a systematic review with meta-analysis, and we have a systematic review by itself. So that little peach color, that shows that's a less number. And the beige color is systematic reviews, and then of course more would be a traditional review. Just to clear up some terminology, I'm pretty sure you guys have heard about literature reviews. Someone will say, oh, do the literature review. You're doing a study, so do the literature review. People confuse literature search with literature review. They meant literature search, not literature review. Even like right now, we're doing a study, and one of the persons requested a student to do the literature review. They asked him to do a literature search. All right? Literature review is an actual method you have to go through. It's a type of study, whereas literature search is just I'm searching for information, background information, whatever this is, introduction for your study or for doing your study. Right? Having said that, we have 5 different types of traditional literature review, which is also called the narrative review. So we have narrative review or the traditional literature review. And we have these 5 types, which is argumentative, integrative, historical, theoretical, and methodological. Each one has its own focus, but majority of these literature review, they are usually integrated, which means they use 2 or more types of the traditional literature review. And then of course we have the systematic review. So we have those 5 types of narrative review, and then we have the systematic review. And here is a comparison of different reviews as well. We're looking at the speed, the methodological detail, risk of bias, and we're looking at our completeness of the study. So these are our 4 things. If we can see our narrative review, so narrative review is pretty quick to do. It has high risk of bias. There's pretty much no methods in which, in other words, we also refer to as a narrative review or traditional literature review as an opinion piece. So in other words, you want to write on a topic, you can write it as whatever you want. There is no systematic way in conducting. And as we are going down this chain, so we have critical inquiries, topic scoping review. Scoping review is looking for what's out there, publish on the topic. In other words, you are doing some exploration, trying to get something. So you build upon it to later on you can do it. Then of course you can do a rapid review of the topic or a mini review of the topic. So if you can do that as well. And then finally you can do your systematic review of meta-analysis. And as you can see, the systematic review of meta-analysis, because it's much more rigorous, you have to follow stringent protocols. It will take a longer time because it's much more scientifically sound. And you have to follow all of these details for methods, the risk of bias. So of course you're not being opinionated now, you're doing something scientifically sound so that others can replicate it. So you have decreased risk, and it's usually much more comprehensive in your search and so that's it. Now here we have 7 steps. These 7 steps are just guidelines. They aren't really only 7 steps. It can be less, it can be more, depending on how you define your steps. So for instance, mine has 11 steps because I've increased the steps, make it simpler, and you can even have more than 11 steps. So the first thing is identify your question, which I think for doing any sort of research, not only systematic review, but any sort of research, the most difficult part of your research is actually coming up with a question. Once you have your question, then obviously you develop your focus, able to go through your disclosure. And of course, you will do your review, literature search, right? So it's a literature, not research, literature. You look at your references, your queries, synthesize, and then of course you write your review. So I'll go through all of these different steps. There is a summary showing you the key steps for meta-analysis. So of course we have systematic review, like I said, synthesis of qualitative information, and the meta-analysis, synthesis of quantitative information. Not to be confused with meta-ethnography. So we can categorize all studies as qualitative or quantitative. Our systematic review and meta-analysis, we are synthesizing quantitative studies. Right? Your meta-ethnography, your synthesizes qualitative studies. Systematic review, you're synthesizing qualitative information of quantitative studies. Right? So again, not get too confused. I'm using all these different terms. Now, relating to your research question, we have this acronym PICO. This is what will help you to guide to get in your research question. So we have patient population, intervention, comparators, or comparison group, the outcome, and T you can also use as your timeline. We will have a sort strategy, again, that will be dependent on what your topic is. You will have guidelines, so usually you have the PRISMA guidelines, which is the most commonly used and the advisable one to use. And then of course we have to select the studies that will be included into our research, which means we'll have eligibility criteria, inclusion criteria, exclusion criteria. I'll give more details as I go along. And of course, we have the data extraction, analysis, and then looking for any sort of heterogeneity. Heterogeneity simply means difference. If there's any, if the studies are dissimilar from each other, and then of course we want to assess for any sort of bias of the different studies, quality, in other words, of the studies, and also we want to look at publication bias. So all of these we go through. So tools required for you to perform a systematic review or meta-analysis. Again, generally, you can have systematic review without meta-analysis. You can also have meta-analysis without systematic review, but generally speaking, hardly anyone ever does a meta-analysis without a systematic. But it's on the flip side, they will do a systematic review without a meta-analysis. Why? Because a meta-analysis requires that you have some software and you must have more skill. Alright? So if you guys ask me, someone did a systematic review on guidance. So we want to, so we'll have a computer for it, so we have internet access because we have to search the databases which are online. And then of course we want to register our study under our PRISMA guidelines. Once we have access to our different databases, we'll sort those databases. We need a reference management software. And of course, to extract our data, we can use Word, Excel, if you use Apple, you can use PHP. Then of course, we will assess for risk of bias, quality. Then we will have our quantitative synthesis by forming a forest plot. We need a software for that. Then we can look for publication bias. Again, you need a software for that. You can use the same software for forest plot and funnel plot. Again, I'll explain all of these as we go. So, step one, our question. Here we have our PICO framework. Patient, population, and problem. What are you investigating? What is your focus? Then we have the intervention. So, of course, if we're speaking about some trial or treatment and so on, we speak about intervention. If we're looking at the risk factor, then we speak about exposure. And then, of course, we will will need a group to compare. And then finally, what is the outcome? What is your main outcome here? So that's our ECO framework to help you formulate your research question. So here is the example I mentioned. So this was actually recently published, as you can see, July 2022. Suicidal Behavior and Ideation in Guyana, Systematic Literature Review. What is quite interesting is, so I know that the theme of this conference is Mental Health and Wellbeing Conference, right, Guyana? Mental Health and Wellbeing Conference. So I said, okay, suicide is such a huge problem in our country, for such a tiny country, such a huge problem. Let me use suicide as my example. So when I was doing my presentation, so I used that. And yesterday, interestingly, I attended one of the sessions, and they mentioned this suicide, and they mentioned this paper. So I was like, oh, someone actually did this study that I was thinking just of using as an example. So wonderful. But as you can see here, we've only done systematic review. And my question is, why not the meta-analysis as well? I'm not sure. That's a contact with the author and find out why they haven't done it. Could be different reasons, but of course, this also opens an opportunity. If you want to do the meta-analysis, you can redo this study and do the meta-analysis added to you. So we were speaking about the hardest thing of your research is what? Getting your question. Here's a question right away. Yes. So we can do that. All right. So step 2. So we have our question. Our question is suicide in Guyana. That will be our question. What's our population? Our population will be Guyana. What is our outcome? Our outcome is suicide. So step 2, we'll search. We will decide on the time period, the language, different types of article, meaning study designs, etc. So which means we'll have our eligibility criteria. Our eligibility criteria will have inclusion criteria and exclusion criteria. What do I mean by these two? People usually confuse, and I always have problems with my students. Always think they are opposites. They are not opposites. Inclusion criteria. So for instance, we want, and again I'll use example for this published study on suicide. We're only looking at published original peer-reviewed articles on suicide in Guyana. So that would be our broad category. We can use the time period from inception to present, or we can say within the last 10 or 20 years. Again, you decide whatever you want. I think there's some transcription going on, hopefully that doesn't distract anyone. We can decide if we're only looking at English language or other languages as well, so can you decide that? If you're only looking at maybe observational studies, so for instance, cohort, cross-sectional, case control, clinical trials, or you're looking at case series, case reports, qualitative studies. So again, based on your study, whatever information is available, you will decide on that inclusion. Exclusion, so despite meeting the inclusion criteria, the exclusion criteria would be, okay, even though you have met these criteria, I'm excluding you for such and such reason. So for instance, what these authors have done, they've excluded Jonestown massacre, right? That's called suicide. Why? Because majority of those people who have committed suicide were Americans. And their topic was suicide in Guyana, which means on Guyanese. So that's why there was a valid reason to exclude the Jonestown suicide. Make sense, everyone? Inclusion, exclusion criteria? Alright, so we'll do our preliminary research and we will register our study. And I have to admit that the authors of this paper, they actually follow these same steps. Again, quite interesting, and I'm happy that they did a good job. So, do your preliminary search. Why do you want to do a preliminary search? Because you want to make sure that someone hasn't published that study already or recently published it. Because if it has, then why are you doing it? What's your rationale? You have to provide some rationale to the journals that you're going to publish it while you're doing it. So you must have that. So obviously you do your preliminary search. And to register as well, you will have a specific code that will give you that this has been registered. And a lot of journals now, what they're doing, they require that your study was registered, else they will not publish it. Right? Especially like the good journals, the top tier journals, they require that. The other ones who are predatory journals, who just want the money, they don't care what you do. Right? You have to be careful about that. And then of course we will follow our guidelines. So there is this website from York University in England. This is called Prospero. So it's an international prospective register for systematic review and meta-analysis. It's free, so you create an account and then you register your systematic review or meta-analysis. It has to be on human studies or animal studies. So here are our PRISMA guidelines. What this PRISMA guideline does, it shows you all the aspects, all the different sections of your paper. So for instance, the title, background, methods, results, discussion, and others. And where in your manuscript have you documented these different steps? Because you have to follow all of these steps. Right? So when you're doing to, again, they will help you to plan your study properly so that you're not missing any steps. Because you don't want to do your study and then at the end you have to fill this out. Where is it actually documented and you realize, oh, I missed a step, and now you can no longer correct it. So it's good to have it at the beginning to know what is expected. Step 4, we will search our available databases, and after searching, we will save our citation files. I know this is a workshop. Ideally, you should have had your computer and you are doing the steps that I would have had. I wasn't sure if we would have had internet access and all these different things and whatever logistics. So it's not really a workshop. It's supposed to be stuff involving me, right? Here is a list of different databases that you can search. I've of course used the most popular, not only popular, but validated that we actually use. So we have PubMed, which is also Medline. Usually institutions will have subscription to Medline. So the difference between Medline and PubMed is freely available. So anyone can just go to PubMed.org and you can search a database. The only problem is you won't have access to the full text. So only what's available, some of them are available. And the good thing is, more and more journals are having open access. So you have to pay, like we have for the authors, they pay for open access. And it becomes freely available. So now you don't have to worry about it. Right? So that's the difference between the PubMed and the Medline. Then there's Embase. Again, you have to pay for Embase. Scopus you have to pay for. Science Direct, Web of Science, all of these you have to pay for. So usually you will be an institution, but of course if you want to do it individually, you can do it individually. Just to give you a heads up about the price, it's pretty expensive. 1 week subscription to Embase is like $750. 1 month is $1,500 US dollars on $60. It's pretty expensive. However, there is Research for Life, and usually institutions in lower income countries, they would have access to Research for Life, so you can access all these databases. So for instance, our institution, we have Research for Life, so I can access pretty much these different databases. Right? I'm not sure if the University of Ghana has this, it does. So Research for Life and all of these. So great.
don't want the rest, but they should have access
For life. Okay, good. So right. So through research of life, because of the economics and stuff, you can have access to Scopus and Lilacs and MBAs. Speaking of Lilacs, so Lilacs is for Latin America. So you'll have like Portuguese and Spanish and so on. Like studies published in Portuguese and Spanish, you can search Lilac. Same thing for Cielo. Cielo is also Latin American. And of course, we all have access to Google Scholar. So if at least this much, you can do your search through PubMed and Google Scholar because it's free and it's available. So there's no excuse for not doing that thing. Alright, so my search terms, again, this is I did this a few weeks ago. Guyana, that's all I put, Guyana, and suicide. So we have what you refer to as Boolean operators. 3 words. And or not. You will have key terminologies. So of course Guyana. And let's say for instance you are interested in studies before independence. Then it would have been G-U-I-A-N-A, right? So you will say G-U-I-A-N-A or G-U-I-A-N-A. So you're searching for both of those terminologies, right? And will be good to other terms. So for instance, suicide, suicidality, suicide ideation, etc. All of those will go with the or operator. And then you combine all of them together, and you have and you have your full search. So this was from PubMed. I got 31 results. Again, I didn't put any sort of restriction. As you can see, from since 1966 to 2022, those are 31 articles published about suicide in Guyana. And I also searched Embase using the same terminology, same keywords. Guyana, suicide, and we got how many? So I search Embase, and I also search Google Scholar. Now with Google Scholar, once you're signed in, you can create a library, and you have to click a star on what you want to save into that. So you can create different subfolders. As you can see, I have quite a few subfolders, and I have Guyana Suicide as one of my subfolders. So I save those. Now, having searched all 3 of these different databases, what do I want to do? I want to export my references. So as you can see here for Google Scholar, you just click export, and it will export it into a different format, depending on what format you want. Again, I did that for all 3 databases. I did it for PubMed, Embase, and Google Scholar. So I save my citation files. Now, I will have my reference management software, and I will import all 3 of them. And with the intention of removing duplicates. I'll explain what I mean by duplicates. So here are some freely available software, except EndNote. EndNote you have to pay for. I believe it's $250 US. So it's quite expensive. The others, Mendeley and Zotero, they are free and they do pretty much the same thing. So who's going to pay $250, right? Especially when every year they upgrade. Years become absolutely in a few years, right? So again, you have the tools, free available tools. You can download these. You can have different plugins for your different computers. You can have a web importer. So for instance, if you're on Google and you're searching, you just click the link and it saves that into your computer, download the full text and so on. Pretty convenient. So now I'm importing my citation files into my reference management software. So as you can see here, I had, so this was 48. So I believe the 48, yeah, so the 48 was from Embase. Right, so 31 was from PubMed, 48 was from Embase, and 48 was also from Google Scholar. And I had, for all 3 of these different databases, total references or citations will be 110. Now, because I've searched 3 different databases, there is a chance that at least one reference may appear in 2 or all 3 of these different databases. So you don't want to count the same citation twice. Hence why we're going to remove the duplicates. Yes. So as we can see on the left side here, we see as we go down to the left, we see Bob and Rico, I and DV, that means duplicate. You click on the duplicate, and this is what you'll see. You will see all the different articles that are duplicated. So for instance, those first 2, they have the same names. So you click on it, and you can see merge. You just click on merge, and it removes the duplicates. So I did that, and after removing my duplicates, I have 82 articles now. So I moved from 110 to 82, which means how many duplicates are removed? 18 plus 10, 28 duplicates are removed. Right? So that brings us to the next step. So again, you're still in your reference management software, and we're going to screen the titles and abstracts for our eligibility criteria. What's our eligibility criteria? Suicide in Guyana. So we're looking for all peer-reviewed original studies on suicide in Guyana. So we screen our titles and abstracts, and here's an example. So again, we're in the software, and here we can look at the abstract. So for instance, 1324 prison suicides in 10 countries in South America, and I would imagine one of those 10 countries would be Guyana. Yes, so they didn't do a single country, they did an international study, and Guyana is included in it, so which means we can exclude it. We have to include it. Now, after searching or screening your titles and abstracts, what you think meets criteria, right? Your inclusion and exclusion criteria. Now you need information, so you're going to save or download a full text of that article. Alright? And after saving it, you're going to do your next step, which is searching that article. Because sometimes the abstract doesn't have all of the required information that you need to synthesize. So that is why you will search the full text of the article. In other words, read the article. But what's more important, not the entire article, you only focus on the methods and the results. You're not really interested in the introduction or the discussion, because you only wanted information on what sort of study they did and what sort of results they've obtained. Alright, so you don't do the entire paper. Again, you can just look at the summary tables and so on, and that will give you the information that's important. So based on our PRISMA guidelines, we have the PRISMA flow chart. This is the PRISMA flow chart. So again, I've looked at 3 different databases. I've had a total of 110 articles. I removed 28 duplicates, and we had 82 articles that we had to screen the titles and the abstracts. Now, of course, I didn't go through all of that because I didn't have too much time to go through all of that. Because I just wanted to give an example. So let's say I screen 82 articles now, and I would say, okay, maybe 50 or 30 of them meet criteria for full text search. So then I'm going to continue searching again, the full text, and then out of those full texts, then a few of them will meet criteria. Right? And then of those, some of them will meet criteria for the systematic review, some of them will meet requirement for the meta-analysis. What I have on the bottom box, right, where you see full text articles removed, generally speaking, the publishers will want to know why you have removed these full text articles, so you have to state your reasons. So for instance, they haven't met your criteria, and whatever else it is. It may be a case report, and you didn't want a case report. It may be a narrative review. It may be an abstract or a conference proceeding, and so on. So you state those reasons. Now we're going to have our articles. So again, this is from the study that I showed earlier. This is the data that they have extracted. So we have to extract the data. So what they have the author, right? The last name of the first author and the year of publication. What was the aim of the study? What time it was performed? What was the study design? As you can see here, they've included case series, they've included ecological study, the study population, what measures they've used. So for instance, they've used the DSM-5 level 1 and 7 for the first study. Then they look at suicide rates. So for instance, the incidence rates or prevalence rates or proportion, how many people out of our population have committed suicide and so on. So that's what they look at. And then the data sources, where they've actually got the data sources. So the first one, it was not applicable. The second one you can see was from the Institute of Health Suicide Surveillance data. And then what measure have they used for suicide? And then what were the key findings? And then I mentioned about risk of bias, quality assessment. So here they've given a score. So all of that is what you will extract into an Excel sheet or a Word document. And then you create a nice table or chart. And that will be part of your result. So for assessing the quality of our studies or risk of bias, there are several different tools. So for instance, this tool is called the Qualis tool. This is the one that I've used for my recent study. The recent study that we did on endometriosis, in fact, what I presented this morning, we've actually used the Qualis tool. And they have 7 different criteria, and they rank it as high risk of bias, low risk of bias, or unclear risk of bias. So again, for each article, so let's say you had 10 articles that met your criteria, you have to assess all of them using this tool. So that's one tool. Now, this is an example of, again, our study, and we've color-coded it into low risk, high risk, and unclear risk. So you can see visually which study is actually good. The one with the most green obviously would mean that was a good study. You can see the one with the reds, okay, they have high risk. And then of course the yellow, a lot of them had yellow. Excuse me. They had an unclear risk. Now there's also the Newcastle Ottawa scale. This is another tool you can use. And my favorite paper that we've published in July, I've actually used this tool. And you can just give a score. Instead of visually depicting it, you can just give a score. For instance, like what the paper that I've just shown you, they'll just give a score. This is an example you can do. Again, you can put, again, there's several different ways on how you want to display your information. So this is another one. So I'm actually doing another paper, and this is how I've used it. So again, and however you want. You don't want to do the same thing over and then so you become bored. Oh, this is all he's doing all the time. You know what I mean? So just change it up, add some spice to it. Alright, so this brings us to our analyses for our quantitative data. So what I've just shown you, that table, that's synthesis of qualitative data. Right, so that will be your systematic review, that as far as they have gotten. They have their table, they summarize the information, looking at different things, looking at different tools, different countries and so on, sources of data and so on. So that's the synthesis, qualitative synthesis. Your quantitative synthesis, you need a software. Again, these software are freely available. You can Google, Review Manager from the Coupling Library, and you can download, and that will create your forest plots. There's another software that I actually like how they present the forest plot. It's nicely colored and so on. So that's called the Open Meta Analyst software. So those are at least 2 software that you can use. There's also the R software, which is also freely downloadable, but that's much more technical because you need to know coding and programming. right? So it's not just click a button and you get your stuff. You need to know how to code this. But again, it's still free. And then, of course, there's startup and there's SPSS and so on that you can use. So here we have our funnel plot. Actually, I don't know why it slipped my mind and spoke so much about it. And I didn't include the forest plot. The forest plot is what I showed many of them this morning, but here I didn't show another again. So what the forest plot is, so when you perform your studies, so let's say for instance we have, so when we're performing our observational studies, so if you're familiar with study designs, we have case control, we have cross-sectional, I'll use cross-sectional because it's much simpler. So cross-sectional is usually, takes the design of a simple survey, right, or a questionnaire. So you ask a bunch of questions and a bunch of risk factors and diseases and so on, and you're trying to find an association. And with that association, you can get prevalence data or proportion, and you can also calculate odds ratio, right, which gives you an indication of the likelihood of someone getting a disease. So that's what we'll use our forest plot. So you can look at the prevalence. So for instance, different studies have different prevalence, and now we're pulling it, and you have one prevalence. And that would be the overall prevalence of all of these studies. Now, one of the advantages, or several of the advantages of doing a meta-analysis is by pooling these different studies, what we do, we increase the sample size, and by increasing the sample size, what we're doing, we're increasing the reliability of the study. In other words, our confidence interval will decrease, which means we have much more precision, right? So your values aren't widely scattered. Much more than that. Because we increase the sample size, by increasing sample size, we increase the power. The power means we're able to detect a true difference if there's an actual true difference, right? So that's the whole idea of doing your meta-analysis as well. So I started off stating why you actually want to do a meta-analysis, what are the benefits, because you're able to give conclusive evidence rather than using one single study. You use several studies, you combine all of them together, and now you have this like a large study of them. You increase your power, your sample size, and your precision. You can also look for publication bias, but generally looking at small studies if they're being included in your study. Generally speaking, journals tend to exclude or not want to publish studies that have shown a negative effect or a very small effect, and especially if the study has a small sample size. So what this funnel plot does, and as you can see, it's pretty much an upturned funnel, right? Hence why they call it a funnel plot, because it has a V shape and it's an inverse funnel, so to speak. And what we have on the funnel plot, it can tell you the study. So each dot represents a study. On the x-axis, we have the odds ratio, which I just explained. And on the y-axis has the study error associated with that study. The greater the study error, right, the standard error, more than likely your study had a smaller sample size. Alright? So as we can see, the one that's higher up, which has a less standard error, that would be a larger sample size, and the one that's lower would be smaller sample size. And as we can see, we have studies on both sides of the line, the vertical line in the middle, in the center, that shows there is a positive effect and there is a negative effect. All right, so imagine you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 studies. 4 studies show there's a positive effect, 4 studies show there's a negative effect. So you as a doctor, let's say for instance you did a meta-analysis on whatever condition and the treatment of that condition. And these 4 studies, 4 of them say there's a beneficial effect for the medication, and 4 of them say there's no beneficial effect. In fact, there's a hazardous effect for those 4 studies. What are you going to do as a doctor? You use the medication or don't use the medication? You don't know, right? So what are we going to do? We're going to do a meta-analysis, combine all of them together and see if there's a definitive conclusion. Right? So that's our first plot. And then of course here our final plot is showing you if there's any bias, if they've excluded especially the small studies. And lastly, and I think much more important, because having done all of that work, what do you want to do? You want to publish your research, right? You spend all that time and effort and money and done your research and not getting it published, right? And no one knows that it's available or not. So obviously you want to publish your study. So you prepare your manuscript according to the journal's guidelines. Each journal has its own guidelines, how to format, how much word count, and all these different things. So you want to format it accordingly. And because you have registered your study in Prospero, you follow the Prisma guidelines, you're checking all of these boxes, more than likely your study will be published, which is submitted to the appropriate. And that brings us to the end of this presentation. Are there any questions? I'm not sure if online, if there are any questions. Any questions here? Pretty much, so are you guys going to do this meta-analysis and add it to that systematic review? One very important information. So generally speaking, when you're doing these type of studies, to increase the scientific rigor of the study, 2 people, at least 2 people should do the study independently. So for instance, here we have our criteria, we have also our strategy. So you're doing it independently, and then the other person will do it independently, and then you will compare. Right? That increases the scientific rigor. I've seen papers where, for the systematic review at least, 1 person has published it, and there might be a predatory journal. Because some of the questions, in fact, on Prospero, they ask, are other people working on this systematic review? If you put 1, guess what? Reject it. So you need to work with someone else, and you need to use their name, their email, and all these things to make sure that it is actually legit. Right? I've also seen other papers where you had 2 sets of people doing it. So a team of 2 people, they did the search independently of each other, and then another team did the same search independently of each other, and then they all compare, which increases the scientific rigor and reliability, validity of the study. So you can team up with your buddies, at least 2 of you, and you do that. Generally, what I do, I usually have my students as well, and I'll have other professors as well, and we all share parts of that. So, okay, you're doing it, you're doing the search, you're doing the extraction, some of them are helping with the qualitative assessment and so on. And you can do your teamwork like that, and you can divide it and conquer. Alright, well, thank you so much. If you don't have any questions, I encourage you all to do. You can't say you don't have the resources, because you do. Most of it is free. And just get a buddy and do it. So it might be, and again, what's also good for Diana, a lot of journals, because you have research for life, right? We qualify for research for life. A lot of journals as well will publish your paper free, so you have no excuse, right? Because the majority of these journals, their price is $2,000, $3,000 minimum US dollars. course.
Are some of those journals that you're talking about that would be published?
Yes. Say it again.
I'm asking for the names or examples of these journals.
Yeah, yes. So I mean, once you search Research for Life, you'll see they give you a list of journals, not only medical journals, all sort of different fields as well. They have really in publish. Of course, the top tier journals are published. England Journal of Medicine, JAMA, Lancet, Nature, after the year 2000, 2000, 5000 million gallons of paper. You have something in the chat?
Thank you.
All right, thank you guys for attending. Oh, Dr. Ramos. So Dr. Ramos is my biggest supporter. She's also from St. George's University. And we're working on a few papers. And she is a very good professor. And she's one of the most efficient professors when it comes to doing research.
She's working in research.
So she's a professor and she also does research. She's an immunologist and microbiologist. All right, thank you everyone. You guys take care now. Have a wonderful day. Oh, you have a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, you said Research for Life.
Research for, right? So for life.